"Sweetheart, be a dear and grab me a black coffee, 2 sugars, and make it hot this time." Marcus Reeves didn't look up from his phone when he said it. He gestured vaguely in Amara Whitfield's direction, the way a man gestures at a piece of office equipment he expects to respond. The conference room at Halstead Financial Partners went quiet in that specific way rooms get quiet when everyone hears something they'd rather pretend they didn't. Amara didn't move. She stood exactly where she'd been standing for the last 3 minutes, near the head of the 20-foot mahogany table, her leather portfolio tucked under her left arm, her right hand resting lightly on the back of an empty executive chair. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the 7 other people seated around the table. She looked at the pitcher of ice water sweating gently onto a linen coaster near the window. Then she said, very softly, "I'm sorry." Marcus finally looked up. Silver hair, charcoal suit, the kind of watch that costs more than most people's cars. He was 58 years old, senior managing partner at Halstead, and he had been sitting at tables like this one for so long that he had stopped noticing who else was in the room. He glanced at Amara, took her in. Blazer, slacks, skin the color of dark honey, no visible identification badge. He'd assumed something the moment she walked through the door, and now he was going to double down on it because men like Marcus Reeves rarely revised assumptions in front of witnesses. "Coffee," he said, slower this time, like he was talking to someone who didn't understand English. "Black, 2 sugars. There's a machine down the hall, or you can call down to the kitchen, whichever is faster." Around the table, nobody spoke. A younger associate, blonde, mid-30s, developed a sudden and deep interest in his notepad. A woman in a cream blouse pressed her lips together and studied her phone. The other senior partner, a man named Prescott, cleared his throat and shuffled some papers, the universal corporate signal for "I'm choosing not to see this." But every single one of them was about to watch the most catastrophic professional miscalculation any of them had witnessed in their entire careers. To understand why what happened in that conference room mattered, you need to understand who Amara Whitfield actually is. Not who Marcus Reeves assumed she was. Not the woman he saw when he glanced up from his phone and decided in half a second that she belonged behind a coffee counter rather than at the head of the table. You need to understand who she actually is. Amara grew up in the 3rd Ward in Houston. Her father was a mechanic who ran a 2-bay garage off Almeda Road for 31 years. Her mother taught 4th grade at a public school where the ceiling leaked when it rained, and the textbooks were older than most of the students. There was no trust fund. There was no legacy admission. There were 3 siblings, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen table where her mother helped all 4 of them with homework every night until they were old enough to help each other. Amara was the oldest. She was the one who noticed things. She noticed the way her father's hands looked at the end of the day, black with grease and stiff at the knuckles. She noticed the specific way her mother folded a $20 bill before slipping it into an envelope for the electric company. She noticed how carefully her parents budgeted, how they never once complained in front of the children, how they made a life that felt full even when it wasn't fully funded. She decided at 14 that she was going to build something, not just for herself, for the block, for the ward, for every kid who had ever walked into a bank with their mother and watched that mother be spoken to like she couldn't read her own account statement. She graduated valedictorian from Jack Yates High School, full ride to Rice University, then Harvard Business School on a fellowship she'd fought 2 years to earn. She turned down 3 consulting offers and 1 investment bank offer that would have set her up for life. Instead, at 27, she took $42,000 in personal savings, a shared office in a converted warehouse in Midtown Houston, and started something called Whitfield Impact Ventures. She was about to teach Marcus Reeves what that name meant. Whitfield Impact Ventures wasn't supposed to survive its first year. That's what 3 separate industry publications said in the trade coverage when Amara launched. A young black woman, no institutional backing, no marquee names on her advisory board, pitching a fund that focused on infrastructure and underserved market investments in secondary and tertiary American cities. The kind of investments the big firms called subscale. The kind that didn't move the needle for $100 billion portfolio, but that could transform a neighborhood if you understood the math. Amara understood the math. She'd been doing the math since she was 14 years old, watching her mother fold that $20 bill. She lost her first 2 pitches. The third one landed her a $900,000 seed commitment from a family office in San Antonio that liked her thesis, and more importantly, liked that she answered every question with a number instead of a story. She closed her first deal in year 2, a small water infrastructure project in East Texas that returned 11% in 18 months. She closed her second deal 6 months later. By year 4, she had returned capital on every completed project. She was quiet about it, deliberately. She'd watched enough young executives torch their careers by talking too much too early, and she had made a decision as a graduate student that she would let her results introduce her. She didn't do panels. She didn't do the conference circuit. She didn't tweet. She built the portfolio. She paid her investors, and she kept her head down until the head-down strategy stopped being viable, which happened somewhere around year 7, when Bloomberg profiled her under the headline "The Quiet Billionaire Nobody's Watching." By the time Amara Whitfield walked into Halstead Financial Partners on that Tuesday morning, Whitfield Impact Ventures was managing over $500 million in committed capital, with a target of $1.2 billion by the end of the fiscal year. She had personally invested in 47 infrastructure and development projects across 9 states. She sat on 3 university boards. She had turned down 2 presidential appointment offers because, as she told a mentor at the time, she was more useful outside government than inside it. But here is the thing about Amara Whitfield that Marcus Reeves did not know when he told her to fetch him coffee. The thing that made what was about to happen both devastating and deeply, almost cinematically ironic. She was there to decide whether Halstead Financial Partners was going to exist in its current form 6 months from now. Halstead was a mid-sized wealth advisory firm with roughly $2.1 billion in assets under management. Old money, mostly. Legacy clients. A brand built over 4 decades by a founding partner who had died 2 years earlier and left the firm in the hands of Marcus Reeves and a nervous board that had watched revenue decline for 6 straight quarters. They had approached Whitfield Impact Ventures 3 months ago about a strategic capital partnership. A $300 million cornerstone investment, plus a co-managed infrastructure fund that would let Halstead reposition itself, breathe again, survive. Amara had spent the last 11 weeks having her team quietly dig into every corner of Halstead's operations. The financials looked salvageable. The client roster was strong. The talent bench was thin but coachable. There was one variable left, one final piece of due diligence she had insisted on doing herself in person without announcement. She wanted to see the culture. She had told exactly 2 people at Halstead that she was coming. The chief operating officer, a woman named Rebecca Lynn, and the head of investor relations. Both of them had been told to keep it confidential and to arrange for her to sit in on the 10 a.m. Tuesday partners meeting without introduction. Just observe. Just watch the room work. Rebecca Lynn had done exactly that. She had also, as it happened, been unexpectedly hospitalized with appendicitis at 6 a.m. that morning. The head of investor relations, Danny Cho, had been informed of Amara's arrival, but had been called into an urgent client crisis at 9:40 and had left a message with the front desk that a Ms. Whitfield would be joining the 10 o'clock meeting and to please show her in. The front desk receptionist, a young man named Kyle who had started 3 weeks ago, had shown Amara to the conference room. He had not been told her title. He had not been told the size of her portfolio. He had simply been told to bring her upstairs. And so Amara Whitfield walked into a room full of senior partners who had no idea who she was, and she took her position near the head of the table, and she waited to see what Halstead Financial Partners looked like when it thought nobody important was watching. Now she knew. The silence in the conference room lasted exactly 4 seconds, long enough for everyone around the table to register what Marcus had said. Long enough for the blonde associate to flip a page in his notepad that didn't need flipping. Long enough for the woman in the cream blouse to check a phone that hadn't buzzed. Then Marcus said it again, because Marcus Reeves was not a man who repeated himself twice without adding an edge. "Sweetheart, coffee, any time this decade." Amara set her portfolio down on the polished mahogany surface. Slowly, deliberately. The soft leather made no sound at all. She placed both hands flat on the table on either side of it, and she looked at Marcus Reeves the way a surgeon looks at an incision she is about to make. "My name isn't Sweetheart," she said. Her voice was low, not angry, not raised, just clear enough that every person at that table heard it and felt the temperature drop 3 degrees. Marcus blinked. He put his phone down on the table, screen up, and gave her the specific smile that men in his position give when they have decided to be patient with someone they consider beneath them. It was a smile she had seen 1,000 times in 1,000 rooms. She had learned to read it the way sailors learn to read weather. "I apologize," he said, in a tone that apologized for nothing. "Miss, if you could just get someone to bring us coffee and let the adults finish this meeting, that would be great." Around the table, one person exhaled audibly. It was Prescott, the other senior partner, and it was the specific exhale of a man who had spent 30 years learning when to speak and when to pretend he hadn't heard anything. He wasn't going to speak now. He was going to let Marcus dig this hole all the way down, and he was going to keep his shoes clean in the process. The blonde associate, whose name was Jeremy Coates, was 34 years old, and he had joined Halstead 9 months earlier from a competing firm. He was ambitious. He was calculating. And he was, at that exact moment, doing frantic mental arithmetic about who this woman was and what it would cost him to say something. He decided the safest move was to say nothing. He would regret that decision within the next 11 minutes. Amara let the silence stretch. She let Marcus sit with his own words. She was very good at silences. She had learned long ago that most people, when given enough silence, would step further into their own mistake before they would step back from it. Marcus stepped further. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms across his chest, and gave her a look he probably thought was magnanimous. "Look," he said, "I don't know how you got up here, but this is a partners' meeting. We're discussing sensitive client matters. Whoever sent you should have briefed you better. You can wait outside. Someone will let you know when we need something." Amara tilted her head slightly, just a fraction of an inch. It was the same movement her mother used to make when one of the children was about to be corrected, and it was one of the very few gestures Amara had inherited without ever meaning to. "Someone will let me know," she repeated softly, "when you need something. That's right. From me." Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't like being mimicked. Very few men who talked the way he talked liked being mimicked, because the moment their own words come back to them in someone else's mouth, they hear how they sound. Marcus heard it. He didn't like it, and instead of correcting course, he doubled down, which is what men like Marcus almost always do. "Miss," he said, and the word came out sharp now, all the veneer gone, "I don't have time for whatever this is. If you can't follow a simple instruction, I'll have you escorted out. Am I making myself clear?" Amara took one long breath. She let it out slowly. Then she pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the empty one she had been standing behind, and she sat down. She placed her portfolio in front of her. She folded her hands on top of it. She looked directly at Marcus Reeves. "Please continue with your meeting," she said. "I'll wait." The room went absolutely still. Prescott's papers stopped shuffling. Jeremy Coates stopped breathing. And Marcus Reeves, who had never once in his career been told to continue with anything by a woman he just tried to dismiss, felt something cold move through his chest for the first time in a very long time. Marcus stared at her. The seat she had just taken was not just any seat. It was the seat at the head of the 20-foot conference table, the seat that in every partners' meeting for the last 4 decades had been occupied by the founding partner, or, since his death, by Marcus himself. Marcus had been sitting in the chair to its immediate right this morning because he'd arrived after everyone else and hadn't bothered to move. He had assumed he'd shift over when the meeting began. He hadn't. Now a woman he'd just ordered to fetch coffee was sitting in it. "You need to get out of that chair." Amara didn't move. "Do you know whose chair that is?" "I have a fairly good idea," she said. Marcus's face went a shade of red that Prescott, watching from 3 seats away, would later describe as cardiac. He pushed back from the table, stood up, and pointed at the door. "That's it. We're done. Jeremy, call security." Jeremy Coates did not move. His hand was on his phone. It stayed on his phone. He was still doing the mental arithmetic, and the arithmetic was now telling him, very loudly, that calling security in this particular moment might be the single most expensive decision of his career. He was staring at Amara's portfolio. He had noticed something. The leather was Italian, but that wasn't what had caught his eye. It was the small embossed monogram on the corner. 2 letters. WIV. Jeremy Coates read Financial News. Jeremy Coates had read the Bloomberg profile 8 months ago. Jeremy Coates was, at that exact moment, having what psychologists sometimes call a rapid recontextualization event. "Marcus," he said quietly. "Jeremy, call security. Now." "Marcus, I think we should." "I said now." The woman in the cream blouse, whose name was Karen Halstead Mercer, and who happened to be the daughter of the deceased founder and the largest individual shareholder in the firm, spoke for the first time. "Marcus." Something in her voice cut through the room. Karen was 62 years old, quiet by disposition, and had spent the last 2 years watching Marcus Reeves run the firm her father had built into the ground while she waited for the board to work up the courage to do something about it. She rarely spoke in these meetings. When she did, people listened. "Sit down," she said. "Karen, I don't need Marcus. Sit down." He didn't sit down, but he didn't finish the sentence either. He just stood there halfway between the table and the door, one hand still raised in Amara's direction, frozen in the specific posture of a man who has just realized that the ground beneath him is not the ground he thought it was. Karen turned to Amara. She studied her for a long moment. Then very carefully she said, "Forgive me, I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Amara met her eyes. "Amara Whitfield." Karen nodded slowly, the way you nod when a suspicion becomes a fact. "Whitfield," she said. "Impact Ventures." "That's right." The room, which had been silent, became something beyond silent. It became the specific vacuum that opens up when 8 people simultaneously understand that they have all just been present for something they will remember for the rest of their professional lives. Prescott's papers slid off his lap. He didn't reach for them. Jeremy Coates put his phone down on the table, screen down, and folded his hands in front of him in the posture of a man attending his own funeral. The woman 2 seats down from Marcus, a mid-level partner named Diane, actually put her hand over her mouth. It was an involuntary gesture. She hadn't planned it. She had simply understood, 1 full second before her body caught up, that the meeting she was sitting in had just ended and something entirely different was about to begin. Marcus was the last to understand. That was the tragedy of Marcus Reeves. He had been the last to understand a great many things over the course of a long career, and he had almost always been protected from the consequences of that slowness by the specific privileges of being who he was in the specific rooms he sat in. Those privileges were about to fail him in a way they had never failed him before. "Whitfield," he repeated slowly, trying it out, trying to make it fit into a framework where he was still in charge. "I don't. The $300 million cornerstone investment," Karen said quietly, still watching Amara. "The one this firm has been waiting on for 11 weeks. Marcus looked at Karen. Then he looked at Amara. Then, very slowly, he began to understand. Amara let him understand at his own pace. She had learned over the years that certain lessons landed better when the person learning them had time to feel the ground shift under each foot separately. She didn't rush Marcus. She didn't help him. She simply watched, hands still folded on her portfolio, as the color drained from his face in 3 distinct waves. The first wave was the recognition of the name. Whitfield Impact Ventures. He had signed the initial engagement letter himself. He had read the term sheet. He had been the one to push, in the last board meeting, for the deal to close by end of quarter because Halstead's cash position was going to become a problem by Q4 if it didn't. The second wave was the recognition that the founder of Whitfield Impact Ventures, the person whose signature was on every document he had reviewed, was Amara Whitfield. The third wave, the worst one, was the recognition that he had never once, in 11 weeks of correspondence, actually looked at a photograph of her. He had assumed. He had assumed the way men like Marcus Reeves had been assuming for 40 years, and it had never cost him anything before, and he had never bothered to notice that the reason it had never cost him anything was that most people didn't have the leverage to make it cost him anything. Amara had the leverage. Marcus lowered his hand, slowly, the one that had been pointing at the door. He looked at the chair he had just tried to have her removed from. He looked at his own empty chair beside it. He looked briefly at Corinne Halstead Mercer, who was watching him with an expression that was somewhere between pity and quiet, patient contempt. "Ms. Whitfield," he began. His voice had shifted registers, softer now. The specific softness of a man who has never had to negotiate from a position of weakness and is discovering in real time that he doesn't know how. "I owe you an apology. There has clearly been a serious miscommunication, and There hasn't been a miscommunication," Amara said. He stopped. "I'm sorry. There hasn't been a miscommunication," she repeated in the same even tone. "You saw a black woman standing in your conference room. You made an assumption. You spoke to me the way you speak to women you assume don't matter. That's not a communication failure, Mr. Reeves. That's a value statement, and I heard it clearly." Marcus opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. Prescott, from 3 seats down, made a small sound that might have been a cough, or might have been the involuntary noise a man makes when he watches a colleague drive off a cliff he'd been warned about for years. "Ms. Whitfield," Marcus tried again, "I want to be very clear that the culture of this firm is precisely what I came here to observe," Amara said. She looked around the table, slowly. She let her eyes rest on each face for 2 full seconds. Prescott, Corinne, Diane, Jeremy Coates, 2 junior partners whose names she hadn't been given. A woman near the far end of the table who had said nothing the entire time, and whose expression Amara had noted from the beginning, because it was the expression of a person who had been watching this exact scene unfold in some variation for a very long time and had stopped expecting anyone to intervene. "I've been sitting on the decision about the Halstead partnership for 3 weeks, Amara continued. "The financials work. The client roster is defensible. The talent bench is thinner than I'd like but manageable. There was one variable I hadn't been able to test remotely, so I asked to come in this morning quietly without announcement and sit in on a partners meeting." She looked at Marcus. "I wanted to see what this firm looks like when it thinks nobody important is watching. I think I have my answer." Marcus's hand went to the back of the chair beside her, not to sit, just to hold himself up. His knuckles were white. Corinne Halstead Mercer cleared her throat. When she spoke, her voice was steady, and it carried the specific authority of a woman who has spent 2 years being quiet because she was gathering evidence, and who has now, quite suddenly, been handed the best piece of evidence she could have hoped for. "Ms. Whitfield," Corinne said, "on behalf of the board, and specifically on behalf of the shareholders my father spent 40 years accountable to, I would like to ask you not to make any final decision today." Amara turned to her. "I understand you have every reason to walk out of this room and never come back, but I would like the opportunity as the largest individual shareholder in this firm to demonstrate that what you just witnessed does not represent the totality of what Halstead is, or what it can be." Amara studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "Go on." Corinne Halstead Mercer stood up, not quickly, not dramatically. Just the deliberate rise of a woman who had decided, in the space of the last 4 minutes, that she was going to say things she had been holding back for 2 years and possibly longer. She looked around the table. "My father founded this firm in 1983, she said. "He started with 4 clients and a leased office above a dry cleaner on Post Oak Boulevard. He built it into what it is today because he believed, and I mean he genuinely believed, that a financial firm is only worth the trust it earns from the people who walk through its doors. Every person. Not the ones who look like the clients on the brochure. Every person." She paused. Nobody moved. "My father died 2 years ago. Since then, I have watched this firm hemorrhage that trust in slow motion. I have watched revenue decline for 6 consecutive quarters. I have watched 3 senior client relationships walk out the door because they no longer felt heard. And I have watched from this seat Exactly the kind of behavior Ms. Whitfield just experienced, expressed toward junior staff, toward administrative colleagues, toward two of our own clients whose complaints were dismissed by leadership as, and I quote from an internal email I have in my possession, oversensitivity. Marcus's face changed color again. This time it was the specific gray of a man who has just realized he has been documented. I have been building a case, Karen said, quietly without looking at him. I did not want to build a case. I wanted my colleagues on this board to see what I was seeing. Some of them did. Some of them, I think, needed something like this morning to see it clearly. And now they have. She turned to Amara, Ms. Whitfield. I'm not going to insult you by asking you to overlook what happened in this room. I am asking you for something more specific. I am asking you for 48 hours. In those 48 hours, this board will convene an emergency session. Actions will be taken. When we come back to you, we will come back with a firm that is prepared to enter into partnership on terms that reflect what Halstead was built to be, not what it has become under its current leadership. The room was very quiet. Prescott, who had said nothing for the entire meeting, finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. I second that request, Diane nodded. So do I. Jeremy Coates, who had spent the last several minutes performing what looked like a slow, silent recalibration of his entire professional loyalty structure, said, Third. Marcus Reeves said nothing. He was still standing behind his chair. His hand was still on the back of it. He was, for the first time in perhaps 20 years, unable to locate his own next sentence. Amara looked at Karen for a long moment. Then she opened her portfolio. She removed a single sheet of paper, heavy stock, the kind of paper that Whitfield Impact Ventures used for term sheets and preliminary letters of intent. She placed it on the table in front of her. She did not slide it toward anyone. She simply set it down where everyone could see it. This is the letter of intent, she said. $300 million in Cornerstone Capital, structured as a co-managed infrastructure fund with a 5-year lockup. My team finalized the language yesterday. I brought it with me because if this morning had gone differently, I was prepared to sign it in this room. She paused. I'm not going to sign it today. She looked directly at Karen. I will give you your 48 hours. I will meet with you and the board on Thursday morning. If at that meeting I am satisfied that the changes you're describing are real and not cosmetic, I will consider revising the terms and moving forward. If I am not satisfied, this letter will be withdrawn, and Whitfield Impact Ventures will announce a different partnership with a different firm by end of business next Friday. I have a list. I have 3 firms on that list. Any of them would take the call. She refolded the letter. She placed it back in her portfolio. Then she looked at Marcus Reeves for the first time in nearly a minute. Mr. Reeves, she said. Her voice was soft again, back to the register she'd used at the beginning. I don't want your apology. An apology is a transaction, and this isn't a transaction. What I want is for you to understand something, so I'm going to say it once clearly, and I would like you to listen. The room held its breath. Amara did not raise her voice. She had never raised her voice in a professional setting in her life, and she was not going to start now. She simply spoke, and the room listened because the room had no other choice. When I walked into this conference room this morning, you looked at me for approximately 1.5 seconds, she said. In that time, you assembled a complete story about who I was and what I was doing here. That story had nothing to do with me. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't given you my name. I hadn't produced a single piece of information you could use to draw a conclusion, but you drew one anyway, and the conclusion you drew was that I was here to serve you. Marcus's hand tightened on the back of the chair. I want you to sit with that for a moment, Amara said. Not with the professional consequences of it. Those are already in motion, and they are no longer under your control. I want you to sit with the fact that you made that assumption in 1.5 seconds, using nothing but your eyes. And I want you to ask yourself how many times over the course of a 40-year career you have made that same assumption about someone who did not have the leverage I have to correct you. She let that sit. Because I am not the first person you have spoken to that way. I know that. Everyone in this room knows that. The difference is that I'm the first person you have spoken to that way whose signature was going to save this firm. And now it isn't. She closed her portfolio. She stood up from the head of the table. She did not look at Marcus again. She looked instead at Karen. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. I'll bring my chief operating officer and my head of legal. I would appreciate it if the composition of the room on your side reflects what you're describing as the future of this firm. Karen nodded. It will. Amara picked up her portfolio and walked out of the conference room. She did not slam the door. She did not look back. The door closed behind her with the soft click of well-engineered hardware, and for approximately 11 seconds, nobody in the conference room said anything at all. Then Karen Halstead Mercer turned to Marcus Reeves and said, quite calmly, "Marcus, you're relieved of your operational responsibilities effective immediately. Please gather your things and wait in your office. The board will convene at 1 p.m. today to formalize what happens next. I would suggest strongly that you not speak to anyone outside this room until you have counsel present." Marcus did not respond. He simply stood there for another moment, then walked, very slowly, toward the door. He looked like a man who had aged 8 years in the last 20 minutes. Prescott exhaled audibly. Diane whispered something that sounded like, "My God." Jeremy Coates, whose future at Halstead had just quite suddenly gotten considerably more interesting, said nothing. He was already thinking about what he was going to say when the reorganization was announced. Karen looked at the rest of the table. "We have a great deal of work to do in the next 48 hours, she said. "Let's begin." Meanwhile, Amara Whitfield walked through the Halstead lobby the same way she had walked in, portfolio under her arm, blazer neat. The receptionist, Kyle, was standing at the front desk. He gave her a small, uncertain smile as she approached the elevator. He had no idea what had happened upstairs. He would know by the end of the day. Everyone at Halstead would know by the end of the day. But for now, he was just a young man at a desk, smiling at a woman he had shown to a conference room an hour earlier. Amara stopped at the desk. She looked at him. "What's your name?" she asked. Kyle Foster." "How long have you been here, Kyle?" 3 weeks tomorrow." She nodded slowly. She reached into the front pocket of her portfolio and removed a business card. "Heavy stock, simple." She wrote something on the back of it with a pen from her jacket pocket, then handed it to him. "If in the next few months you find yourself looking for a different opportunity," she said, "call that number. Ask for Cheryl. Tell her I sent you." Kyle looked at the card. His eyes widened. He looked up at her. "Ma'am, I don't. You showed me courtesy this morning," Amara said. "That's worth more than most people realize. Keep the card." Then she stepped into the elevator, and the doors closed. The elevator descended 22 floors in silence. Amara stood in the center of the car, portfolio under her arm, and looked at her own reflection in the polished brass of the doors. She did not smile. She did not exhale in relief. She had, over the course of her career, trained herself out of the small physical tells that most people give when they walk out of a room like the one she had just walked out of. She had trained herself because those tells were expensive. They gave things away. They told people how much a moment had cost you, and people who knew how much a moment had cost you sometimes used that information later. She simply stood in the elevator and waited for the doors to open. When they did, she walked through the marble lobby of the Halstead building, out the revolving doors, and onto the sidewalk. The Houston morning was already climbing toward 90 degrees. She walked 1.5 blocks to the parking garage where she had left her car, took the stairs to the 4th level, unlocked a dark blue Lexus that was 3 years old and had 81,000 miles on it, and got in. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, engine off, hands in her lap. Then she picked up her phone and called Cheryl. Cheryl Ndiaye had been Amara's chief of staff for 6 years. She was 39 years old, a Georgetown law graduate, and she had the specific gift of being able to translate Amara's clipped, low-syllable count directives into fully formed operational plans in something close to real time. She answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" "Not the way anyone expected." "Tell me." Amara told her. It took 4 minutes. Cheryl did not interrupt. Cheryl never interrupted. When Amara finished, Cheryl was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, which was the specific length of silence that meant she was already assembling a list. "Do you want me to pull the deal?" "Not yet. Karen Halstead Mercer asked for 48 hours. I gave them to her." "You think she'll deliver?" I think she's been waiting for permission to deliver for 2 years. This morning gave her that permission. Whether the rest of the board follows her is a separate question. Understood. What do you need from me? 3 things. First, I need the alternate partnership list refreshed. Confirm all 3 firms are still available and interested. Second, I need a discreet back channel to Corinne's office. Direct line, not through the general partner's inbox. Third, I want to know everything about a young man named Kyle Foster who's been working the Halstead front desk for 3 weeks. Where he went to school, where he came from. Whether he's someone we want to be in the business of helping. Cheryl was writing. Amara could hear the pen moving. Anything else? One more thing. I want you to reach out to the head of the Houston Business Journal, off the record. I want to know if any reporters have been sniffing around the Halstead situation. If anyone has, I want to know their name and their angle before Thursday morning. Do you want to preempt a story? No, I want to know what story is already being told so that when I make a decision on Thursday, I'm making it with a full picture. Got it. I'll have everything by end of day. Thank you. Amara hung up. She sat for another moment in the parked car. Then she started the engine, backed out of the space, and drove to her office, which was located in a converted warehouse in Midtown. The same building she had leased 11 years ago when Whitfield Impact Ventures was still just an idea and a laptop, and a name she had chosen because her mother had once told her that the word impact could mean either a collision or a legacy, and that the difference between the two came down to what you did with the second one. The office had grown. There were now 47 employees, a real reception area, a small conference room with a view of the freeway, and a coffee bar in the corner that anyone could use, including Amara, who made her own coffee every morning and had never once asked anyone else to bring her one. She walked into her office. She closed the door. She sat down behind her desk. She opened her portfolio, removed the letter of intent for Halstead, and placed it in the center of the desk, exactly where it had been sitting for the last 24 hours before she had brought it with her that morning. Then, and only then, did she allow herself to exhale. The 48 hours that followed moved faster than anyone at Halstead had thought possible. By noon on Tuesday, Marcus Reeves had been formally suspended pending investigation. The board convened at 1 p.m., as Corinne had promised, and by 3:30 they had voted unanimously to remove him from his role as senior managing partner. His attorney arrived at 4. The severance negotiation was brutal, short, and ended with Marcus walking out of the Halstead building for the last time at 6:45, carrying a single cardboard box that a security escort had helped him pack. He did not speak to anyone. Nobody spoke to him. By Wednesday morning, Corinne Halstead Mercer had been elevated to interim chair. Prescott, who had spent 30 years learning when to keep his shoes clean and who had, at the last possible moment, chosen to step out of the mud, was named interim chief operating officer. Jeremy Coates, whose recalibration had been noticed by all the right people, was quietly promoted to a newly created role focused on organizational culture and client relations. It was not the role he had been angling for. It was, in some ways, a better one, because it put his name on any success the firm could show over the next 6 months. By Wednesday afternoon, Corinne had personally called every senior partner in the firm, every mid-level partner, and every one of the 11 administrative staff members Marcus Reeves had spoken to over the years in ways that had generated internal complaints. She apologized to each of them by name. She did not use the word misunderstanding. She used the word failure. Specifically, my failure and the firm's failure and a failure that will not continue. She was building something. She was building it fast. She was building it in front of witnesses because she understood, in a way Marcus Reeves had never understood, that culture was not a poster on the wall. It was the sum of what happened in rooms when nobody was watching, and it was the sum of what happened in rooms when everyone was. By Wednesday evening, Cheryl Ndiaye had delivered a 15-page briefing to Amara's desk. The Halstead board had made 23 verifiable operational changes in 32 hours. 3 new hires had been announced. 2 long-standing policies had been rewritten. A cultural audit had been commissioned from an outside firm with instructions to report directly to the board, not to management. Karen had signed a personal memo to the entire company committing to quarterly town halls, an anonymous complaint pathway, and public disclosure of internal diversity data going forward. Cheryl's briefing also contained a note about Kyle Foster. Kyle was 24 years old, first-generation college graduate. Bachelor's in economics from the University of Houston. He had been working 2 jobs to pay off student loans and had taken the Halstead front desk role because it came with benefits. His performance reviews from his prior employer described him as consistently thoughtful, genuinely curious about the work, and someone who treats every person who walks through the door like they matter. Amara read that line twice. She set the briefing down. She picked up her phone and called Cheryl. Offer him an interview next week. Analyst track, full benefits, whatever we're paying entry level plus 10%. Done. Thursday morning arrived clear and hot. Amara drove herself to the Halstead building at 8:45. She parked in the same garage. She took the same elevator. She wore the same dark slacks and a different blazer, this one navy, a small silver pin on the lapel that had belonged to her mother. She walked into the same conference room. The room was different. Karen Halstead Mercer stood as she entered. So did Prescott. So did Diane. So did Jeremy Coates. So did 3 faces Amara had not seen on Tuesday, the newly appointed chief compliance officer, a senior partner from the Dallas office who had flown in overnight, and the head of the newly formed Culture and Client Relations Division. 6 people at the table. 6 people who stood up when Amara entered, not because they were performing respect, but because they had all, in different ways, decided over the last 48 hours that this was the room they wanted to be in, and this was the person they wanted to be seen standing for. Karen extended a hand across the table. "Ms. Whitfield, thank you for coming back." Amara shook her hand. She sat down. Cheryl sat beside her. Amara's head of legal, a woman named Priya Menon, sat on her other side. Karen opened a leather folder. "I'd like to walk you through what we've done." Amara nodded. "Please do." Karen walked her through it, all of it. The removals, the promotions, the audits, the policies, the memos, the pending hires, the outside consultants, the specific language of the new client-facing protocols. She did not rush. She did not oversell. She simply laid out what had been done and what was still in motion. And she did it with the specific clarity of a woman who had spent 2 years watching a firm decay and had, in the last 48 hours, finally been allowed to reach for the tools she'd been keeping in her drawer. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 11 minutes. At the end of it, Amara took the letter of intent out of her portfolio. She placed it on the table. She picked up a pen. She signed it. The Halstead partnership closed formally at 11 a.m. the following Monday. $300 million in cornerstone capital, structured exactly as the term sheet had specified, with one additional clause that Priya Menon had drafted and that Karen Halstead Mercer had accepted without negotiation. A governance provision requiring quarterly cultural reporting to a joint oversight committee, chaired by Whitfield Impact Ventures, for the duration of the 5-year lockup. The story of what had happened in the conference room did not make the papers. Amara had asked specifically that it not because she wanted to protect Marcus Reeves. She did not, but because she had learned over the years that certain stories, when told publicly, became about the wrong things. They became about the villain. They became about the drama. They became about the specific person who had said the specific thing, and they stopped being about what the story was actually for. What the story was for, in Amara's mind, was not Marcus. It was Kyle. Kyle Foster interviewed with Whitfield Impact Ventures the following Tuesday. He was hired the same afternoon. He started 3 weeks later as a junior analyst. Within 18 months, he had earned his Series 7 and Series 63. Within 3 years, he was leading a small deal team of his own, focused on affordable housing infrastructure in the Gulf Coast region. He kept the business card Amara had given him in the top drawer of his desk. He did not tell anyone the story of how he got it for a very long time. The Halstead partnership went on to be one of the most successful capital deployments in Whitfield Impact Ventures history. The co-managed infrastructure fund closed its first billion in commitments within the first year. Corinne Halstead Mercer, in her second year as chair, was named one of the 50 most transformative leaders in American finance by an industry publication that had, 3 years earlier, declined to include her father in the same list. Marcus Reeves did not resurface professionally in any meaningful way. He surfaced briefly once in an industry newsletter that mentioned he had taken a consulting role at a boutique firm in another state. The consulting role did not last. What he did after that, and what he thought about during the years that followed, and whether he ever truly understood, what had happened to him in that conference room, is not something anyone outside of him will ever know. Some reckonings happen publicly. Others happen quietly, in rooms with no witnesses, on nights when the person has run out of people to blame. Amara continued to make her own coffee every morning. She continued to drive her own car. She continued to walk into rooms without announcement, without entourage, without the visible signals of wealth that would have protected her from the specific kind of encounter she'd had at Halstead. She had been asked more than once by well-meaning colleagues and journalists why she didn't just make herself more legible, why she didn't just wear the watch or bring the assistant or drop the title into the first 30 seconds of every conversation. Her answer was always the same. Because the way people treat me before they know who I am tells me who they are, and that's the information I actually need. So here is what I want to leave you with. And I want your honest answer in the comments. Not about Amara, not about Marcus, not about the deal or the outcome or the six-figure check that Corinne Halstead Mercer signed that Monday morning, about the conference room, about the moment, about the 7 other people who sat at that table on Tuesday morning and heard a man tell a black woman to fetch him coffee and who said nothing until it became safe to speak. What would you have done? If this story hit something real in you, share it, because the conversation it starts is the whole point. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.